I had just finished locking up for the night, double-checking the doors like I always did. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant buzz of streetlights were the only sounds in my small apartment. Everything seemed normal, or at least as normal as life had been lately, but then I noticed the lights in the hallway flickering. Just once, just for a split second, but enough to make me pause. I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m., nothing unusual. Probably a blown fuse, I thought. I shook my head and returned to my small, cluttered living room, trying to ignore the creeping unease settling in my chest. Max, my German shepherd, stirred in his bed. Usually a deep sleeper, he sat up abruptly, ears pricked, staring toward the window. Low, guttural growls rumbled from his throat. I frowned. "Relax, boy," I whispered. But even as I said it, the hairs on my arms stood on end. Outside, the usual hum of the city was gone. No distant traffic. No occasional late-night chatter. Just silence, heavy, oppressive. I opened the blinds slightly, expecting maybe an empty street. But it was worse than that. Cars sat parked mid-turn, doors open as if everyone had vanished mid-motion. The streetlights cast long shadows, and every shadow seemed wrong, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. I rubbed my eyes. "It's nothing," I muttered, but my heart beat faster. Then I heard it, faint at first, almost beneath the silence. A groan, low and wet. Coming from the street. I froze, straining to listen. Another groan, then another. Somewhere in the distance a siren wailed, but it sounded distorted, as if underwater. Max let out a sharp bark, ears flat, hackles raised. I grabbed a flashlight, switching it on and sweeping it across the room. Nothing, only the familiar clutter. But outside, I could see movement at the corner of my eye, shadows flickering, stretching unnaturally along the walls of buildings. I tried to rationalize it. It's just the wind, reflections, hallucinations. But my stomach churned. The air felt thick, like someone or something was holding it there. My hands shook slightly as I checked my phone. No signal, nothing. Just the faint glow of the screen, useless. I went to bed that night thinking tomorrow would be normal. I was wrong. I awoke to an unsettling quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on the chest and makes every breath feel unnatural. Sunlight pierced through the blinds, but instead of warmth, it cast cold, harsh lines across the room. When I looked outside, the streets were empty, deserted in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. There were no children playing, no neighbors walking dogs, no morning commuters rushing to their cars. Only an eerie stillness stretched across the town, broken occasionally by faint groans that seemed to come from every direction at once. A strange, metallic scent hung in the air, mingled with something foul, something that I could not identify yet instinctively knew was wrong. I stepped outside cautiously, my senses on high alert. At first, I saw nothing more than an abandoned shopping cart rolling slowly down the street, nudged by the wind, but then I noticed the first sign of abnormality. A neighbor, Mrs. Kelling, walking unsteadily down the sidewalk. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as if her body obeyed a rhythm completely alien to human motion. Her eyes were vacant, staring past me without comprehension. I called her name and she did not respond. She did not blink. She continued forward, a faint growl escaping her lips as her teeth flashed unnaturally in the morning light. I stumbled back inside, heart racing. My mind refused to process what I had just seen. Perhaps it was a hallucination, a trick of sleep deprivation, or some chemical spill I had not been informed about. I tried to rationalize it, yet another sound reached my ears, a low guttural bark. My dog Max in the yard had frozen, hackles raised, staring toward the street. There was movement in the distance, a small group of figures stumbling and lunging, too fast to be ordinary, too violent to be sane. Each step outside the house revealed more. A neighbor's cat, usually timid and skittish, ran in panicked circles, eyes wide, fur bristling. I saw Mr. Carmichael, the mailman, lunge at a pedestrian who had not noticed him, his jaw snapping with a horrifying precision, tearing through clothing and flesh alike. My stomach churned, and a cold sweat spread across my back as the horrifying realization sank in. Normal behavior was gone. The town I had known all my life had shifted into something unrecognizable, a chaotic nightmare where instinct overrode humanity. Panic surged through me. Instincts honed through years of careful living, planning, and awareness took over. I moved quickly, seeking shelter, scanning every shadow, every alley. So I could hear them before I saw them, Soft shuffling, guttural growls, breaths harsh and ragged. When I caught sight of them, the infected, it was unlike anything I had imagined. They were faster, unpredictable, completely inhuman. Limbs moved at odd angles, their eyes empty yet searching. Their teeth, sharp and stained, glinted as they lunged toward anything living. I backed into my house, slamming the door shut, and leaned against it, struggling to breathe. The realization was clear and undeniable. The world as I had known it had ended overnight. Every familiar face, every familiar street, every normal sound had been replaced with a nightmare I could not escape. By the time I dared to peek through a window, the streets were filled with movement, the infected spreading with terrifying speed. Survival was no longer an abstract possibility. It was the only option. The moment the realization hit me that the streets were no longer mine, I knew I had to secure a safe location immediately. My house, once a place of comfort, now felt fragile against the chaos beyond its walls. I moved quickly, checking every door and window, ensuring each latch was engaged, each lock reinforced. The reinforced shutters slid into place with a heavy thud that somehow brought me little comfort. For the sounds outside remained constant, the shuffling, the groans, the sharp, inhuman cries of those who had once been my neighbors. I hurried to gather essentials, packing supplies into a backpack with meticulous care. Water, non-perishable food, first aid kits, flashlights, batteries, and my few trusted weapons. My mind raced, calculating every possible scenario. What if they breached my perimeter? What if the noise drew them closer? What if I had underestimated their speed? Panic threatened to take over, but I forced it back, telling myself that clarity would be my only ally. As I moved through the house, the realization of complete isolation pressed down on me like a suffocating weight. There was no police, no military, no neighbors to call for help. Not even a single vehicle moved on the streets outside, save for the occasional stagger of the infected. My phone, useless, displayed only no signal, and every attempt to contact anyone was met with silence. A chill ran down my spine as I understood that in this moment, survival rested solely on my actions. Fear began to seep into my thoughts, creeping along the edges of my consciousness. I could not shake the image of Mrs. Kelling, her vacant eyes the tearing of flesh. How many more had fallen in the night? Were there others left like me? Or was I truly alone in a world that had ceased to be recognizable? Guilt gnawed at me too. Was there someone I should have helped, someone I could have saved before it was too late? The thoughts came and went, each one heavier than the last, yet there was no time to dwell. Every second counted, and hesitation could be fatal. Then came the first close encounter. A sound from the street, a rapid, unsteady shuffle, alerted me. I crouched near the living room window, heart pounding, and saw a figure dart between abandoned cars. It moved erratically, limbs bending in ways that defied natural motion. Its eyes, glazed and vacant, scanned the area like a predator seeking prey. I held my breath as it paused, sniffing the air, unaware of my presence but dangerously close. One step, then another, and it passed within feet of my window, a growl escaping its throat. My hands shook, gripping the edge of the sill as I forced myself to remain silent, to stay unseen. After what felt like an eternity, the figure disappeared into the shadows of the alley. The brush of near death left my chest tight, adrenaline surging through every nerve. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to focus, to plan, to prepare for what I knew would come again. The reality was undeniable. These were not mindless wanderers. They were intelligent enough to hunt, instinctual enough to strike without warning, and I had only just begun to comprehend the depth of the threat. That night, as darkness fell over the town, I moved through my home with precision and vigilance, every creak of the floorboards and whisper of wind setting my nerves on edge. My flashlight beam cut through shadows like a fragile barrier against the encroaching unknown. I reinforced barricades, double-checked locks, and arranged my weapons within reach. Each action grounded me, kept me tethered to some semblance of control. Yet control was fragile and fleeting. By the time I settled into a corner of the living room, backpack at my side and weapons within arm's reach, I understood that the first night would be a test of endurance, patience, and wits. Outside, the world had descended into chaos, but inside I had to remain a silent observer, a calculated survivor, waiting for the next move in a game whose rules had been violently rewritten. I knew that staying inside indefinitely was impossible. My supplies would not last, and the longer I remained stationary, the more dangerous it could become if the infected discovered my location. I took a deep breath, tightened the straps on my backpack, and checked my weapons once more. The streets outside awaited me, eerily silent yet brimming with unseen threats. As I stepped out, the world felt alien. The morning sun, normally comforting, now cast long distorted shadows across the deserted streets. Cars were abandoned mid-lane, their doors left open as if the occupants had vanished in a single heartbeat. Grocery stores and pharmacies were shattered and looted, their shelves empty, a grim reminder of the panic that had overtaken the town. Windows were broken, signs swung loosely in the wind, and the occasional flicker of movement at a distant alley made my heart race. With every step, the psychological weight of the situation pressed down harder. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and faint groans echoed from hidden corners, sometimes too close to dismiss. I caught myself imagining voices, pleas for help, cries of loved ones, yet when I paused and listened carefully, there was nothing but the wind and the creak of abandoned metal. Doubts crept in. Was my mind beginning to unravel, or were these faint whispers real warnings from the darkness? I kept moving, choosing my path with care. Major roads were impassable, blocked by overturned vehicles or wandering hordes. Narrow alleys and back streets became my lifelines, offering both concealment and risk. I learned quickly to move silently, crouching behind overturned trash bins or ducking into doorways when the groans grew nearer. My senses sharpened. Every twitch of a shadow, every distant cry, became a signal to adjust, evade, or hide. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of the infected, faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger, bodies contorted, moving faster than I had imagined possible. One figure appeared at the corner of a street, stopping suddenly to sniff the air. My heart raced as it lingered, then vanished into the shadows, unaware of my presence. Each encounter, even fleeting, reinforced the brutal truth. These were no ordinary zombies. They were unpredictable, intelligent enough to hunt, patient enough to wait for mistakes. I relied heavily on my tactical instincts, honed over years of preparation. I avoided open streets and areas that smelled of smoke or blood, knowing that chaos and noise attracted attention. I timed my movements with the distant echoes of gunshots or explosions from downtown, using them as cover while keeping out of the main horde's path. Every decision carried weight, and a single misstep could be fatal. As I ventured further, my psychological state frayed. I questioned every sound, every shadow, wondering if my imagination was conspiring against me. Was that a shape in the fog, or my mind creating a phantom? Were the groans coming from a hidden infected, or the wind echoing through ruined buildings? Fear and reality blurred, but I could not afford to pause. Survival demanded clarity, and yet clarity felt like a luxury I could no longer claim. Hours passed in a tense rhythm of cautious movement and silent observation. I scavenged what I could from looted stores, canned food, water bottles, anything to sustain me. Each discovery was bittersweet, a small victory against the chaos, but also a stark reminder that I was completely alone in a town that had turned hostile in the night. Every corner, every shadow, every faint sound reminded me that the world I had once known was gone. By the time I found a temporary safe spot to rest and regroup, my muscles were aching, my nerves frayed, and my mind on high alert. So I crouched behind the remnants of a half-collapsed building, scanning the streets, noting the patterns of the wandering infected, and planning my next move. Every decision, every breath, became a delicate balance between staying alive and succumbing to the terror surrounding me. I thought I had a sense of the infected by now, but the town still had ways of catching me off guard. One street that looked safe on the map was suddenly a dead end, barricaded by overturned cars and debris. Beyond the wreckage, I could hear them, low guttural growls shuffling closer, moving with that terrifying combination of patience and instinct. My heart pounded as I realized I had no choice but to find another way fast. Max, always vigilant, growled low, his body tense at my side. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. If anything happened to him, I would not survive the night. Every movement had to be calculated, silent. I ducked behind a partially collapsed wall, the cold wind cutting through my jacket, and surveyed the narrow alley next to me. It was a tight squeeze, barely wide enough for the two of us, but it offered cover. The first infected appeared at the edge of the debris field, its face pale and twisted, reflected the weak sunlight seeping through the clouds. It sniffed the air, its vacant eyes scanning, almost aware of our presence. I held my breath, counting slowly in my mind, every second feeling like a minute. Max pressed close, his ears flicking, muscles coiled like springs ready to launch. I edged forward inch by inch, the alley walls scraping my arms, debris crunching faintly under my boots. Another groan echoed behind me, closer this time. I froze, praying my heartbeats were silent, willing the creature to move away. It paused, head tilting unnaturally before shuffling down the alley. Relief washed over me, but it was temporary. A sudden noise, a metal pipe clattering against bricks, sent my heart into my throat. The entire horde had noticed us. They poured into the street slow at first, then faster, drawn by instinct and sound. Panic surged, but I forced myself to think. Max leapt forward, teeth bared, lunging at one infected that had come too close. I grabbed a pipe from the ground, swinging it just as another reached for us, its nails scraping across my shoulder. Pain flared sharply, burning, but adrenaline carried me forward. We ran, alley after alley, turning corners sharply, using every obstacle as cover. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps, sweat and blood mixing on my arms. Max kept pace, occasionally yelping as an infected lunged too close, his vest saving him more than once. The fear of losing him gnawed at me as much as the threat of the infected themselves. Each glance over my shoulder reminded me how quickly the town had become a predator's playground, how easily death could find us. At one point I stumbled over loose debris, scraping my knee and elbow against the rough concrete. Pain exploded, but I could not stop. Max nudged me, a silent reminder that we had to keep moving. The alley opened into a small courtyard. I saw a narrow exit on the opposite side, barely wide enough to slip through before the horde cornered us. Timing was everything. I held Max close, counting the beats, waiting for the right moment. The first wave of infected surged past the courtyard, distracted by a distant noise. We sprinted. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I pushed harder, dragging Max behind me while keeping an eye out for the slower stalkers hiding in shadow. Nails scraped the walls near my head, teeth snapped at our heels, but we made it through, barely. We collapsed behind a dumpster, heaving, covered in sweat, grime, and blood from minor scratches. Max licked my hand, his eyes wide but alert. I felt the weight of the narrow escape settle on me. The close call reminded me that survival was no longer about preparation alone. It was about instinct, speed, and trust. I could not afford another mistake. The infected were patient predators, relentless and silent, and I had just learned how close I had come to losing everything, including my only companion. After what felt like hours of running, ducking and narrowly escaping death, I stumbled upon an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. The structure was battered, windows shattered and doors hanging crookedly on their hinges, but it offered a sliver of protection. I guided Max inside, his paws echoing against the concrete floor, ears perked, every sense alert. The heavy air smelled of dust, mildew and decay, a silent reminder that the world outside had gone to ruin. I barricaded the main entrance with what I could find. Old pallets, a rusted metal door and a few heavy crates. It was not much, but it was something. I sank to the floor, Max curling beside me, and allowed myself the first real moment to breathe. The city beyond the walls was unrecognizable. Cars lay abandoned, streets littered with debris, and buildings that once symbolized normalcy now stood as hollow, silent witnesses to chaos. The gravity of it hit me in waves. My neighbors, my friends, people I had shared laughs and casual greetings with, all either gone or transformed into those things that stalked the streets. Loneliness pressed in on me harder than the fear of the infected. I felt guilt twisting in my chest. Why had I survived when others had not? The thought of being utterly alone in a world overrun by death was almost too much to bear. Even here, the warehouse offered only temporary reprieve. From the cracked windows, I could hear distant groans, the shuffling steps of the infected patrolling the outskirts, their instincts drawing them toward any sign of life. A sudden thump on the roof made Max growl low in his throat, and I tightened my grip on the pipe I had brought along. This false sense of safety was fragile. I knew the world outside would not forgive the slightest lapse in vigilance. I let my mind wander, grappling with memories of a normal life now lost. The simple comforts of home, laughter of friends, the mundane morning routines, all vanished in a single night. Every shadow in the corners of the warehouse seemed to whisper what might still be lurking outside. Yet despite the fear and grief, there was a spark of determination. I could not allow despair to consume me. Survival was not just a goal anymore. It was a relentless necessity, a duty to stay alive, if only to honor those who had fallen. As the light faded and the first hints of night crept through the broken windows, I realized that safety was an illusion. The infected would continue hunting, and my momentary refuge was only a pause in an endless game of predator and prey. I drew Max closer, feeling the warmth of his presence, and silently promised myself that no matter what came, we would face it together. For now, this warehouse was our haven. Tomorrow the hunt would resume. Night had fully fallen, and shadows consumed every corner of the warehouse. I sat tense, ears straining for any hint of movement, Max growling low beside me. Then it began, a distant guttural roar multiplied, swelling into a cacophony of moans and snarls. The horde had found us. My heart pounded like a drum, and adrenaline surged through my veins. I scanned the warehouse for anything that could serve as a weapon. Broken pipes, shards of glass, even the rusted metal door I had used to barricade the entrance. I grabbed whatever I could. The sound of shuffling feet and dragging limbs grew louder, the groans now just beyond the barricade. A crash. One of the pallets had given way. I barely had time to react before a mass of clawing, desperate hands pushed through the gap. I swung the pipe with everything I had, connecting with a wet, sickening thud. The creature recoiled, but another surged forward. My breaths came in sharp, ragged gasps. Panic clawed at my mind, but I forced myself to focus, using the environment to my advantage. Crates toppled, jagged edges blocked corridors, every sound meant something. An approaching threat, a chance to strike, a moment to survive. Then a shadow lunged from the side, faster than I expected. I froze. Max had leapt at the nearest infected, sinking his teeth and knocking it back just as it aimed for my shoulder. My companion's loyalty and training had saved my life. I did not have time to process the relief. The rest of the horde pressed forward relentlessly. One creature broke through a weakened window, its grey, vacant eyes fixed on me. My grip tightened on the pipe, but instinct screamed that this might be the end. Max growled, bristling, and I realized the only chance we had was to move. I kicked a crate, creating a temporary barricade, then ducked low as the infected lunged, teeth snapping just inches from my arm. The warehouse became a blur of motion, pipes swinging, bodies falling, Max darting through shadows to intercept. Time felt elastic, each second stretched into an eternity. I could feel my chest burning, muscles screaming, but I forced myself to keep going. The adrenaline sharpened my senses. Every moan, every shuffle told me where the next threat would come from. Finally, a gap appeared, a broken side door leading to the alley behind the warehouse. I grabbed Max, sprinting, barely noticing the scratches and bruises across my arms. Behind us, the horde swarmed the barricade, howls echoing into the night. My pulse raced, lungs burning, but somehow we made it into the alley. Hearts hammering, bodies trembling, and still alive. For a moment, I allowed myself to collapse against the wall. Max pressed against my side. The night was far from over, but we had survived the first true test. The horde would continue hunting, but we had made it through the closest brush with death. My hands shook as I checked my wounds, my mind already plotting the next moves. Every survival instinct screamed that the nightmare was only beginning. The horde's howls faded behind us, but only slightly. Every shadow along the alley made me flinch. Every distant groan tightened the knot of fear in my chest. Max stayed close, ears perked, alert to every sound. My eyes scanned the broken streets, searching desperately for any way out. Then I saw it, an abandoned pickup truck, rusted but functional, hidden behind a toppled billboard. The keys still hung in the ignition. Relief surged through me, but there was no time to celebrate. I leapt into the driver's seat, Max climbing in beside me, and the engine sputtered to life. The town was unrecognizable. Streets that had once been familiar were now mazes of overturned cars, shattered windows, and shadows that moved with purpose. Groans echoed from every direction, and I realized the infected were not just mindless. They were everywhere, swarming with a relentless hunger. I navigated carefully, following a path I had noticed earlier through the railway yard. Cargo containers created narrow corridors, a dangerous maze, but it was our only chance. Max's alert growls warned me of a staggering figure behind a container. I swerved just in time, narrowly avoiding the snap of its jaws. My heart raced, each breath sharp and ragged, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, the railway yard opened into a clearing. The moonlight reflected off the truck's metal, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to breathe. The town behind me was in chaos, consumed by a nightmare that I could not stop. I glanced at Max, his eyes shining in the dim light, the only companion I had left. As the engine roared and we sped toward the unknown, I reflected on everything I had lost: neighbors, friends, the life I had taken for granted. The world I knew was gone, replaced by a lawless, terrifying void. And yet somehow we had survived. In the distance, a low guttural moan carried over the wind. My stomach twisted. The town might appear empty, but the horde was still out there, lurking in shadows, waiting. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, Max leaning against my side for comfort and protection, and as I drove away, leaving the ruins of my entire world behind, I whispered to no one in particular, "I am the last." But for how long? The night swallowed us whole, and the silence was only broken by the echoing groans of the town left behind.